Today we're going to hear from Markus Stitz, who I will introduce a bit more in a moment. But first, whilst everyone's coming in, just going to give everyone a little bit of kind of housekeeping-y stuff. Um, First up, I'm going to read the spiel that Laura's written, because I agree with every single word of it. The Cycle Touring Festival has been going since 2015. It's been a mixture of in-person events and virtual events over the years, but everything we do is with the aim of bringing people together to encourage and inspire. And I'm going to move that there so I can encourage and inspire each other to explore the world by bike. The bicycle is the finest means of transport if you want to see the world at a sensible speed. Amen. Being able to take it all in at the same time is actually making some degree of progress. The festival is all organised by volunteers, no employees, and speakers give up their time for free because they understand the value and joy of being part of this wonderful community. We don't want cost to be a barrier, so all talks this week are free. Ooh, someone just said the chat is disabled. Do I need to enable it somehow? Sorry, I'm new to being the actual host. I can see the chat. Let me just. Does that work? Can everyone see it now? No one can tell. The chat's open. No, no, I'm just seeing people answering in the Q&A and hello from Darlington. Right, let's
I can see it.
So I can see a chat between me and Markus. Why won't it let me? The Q&A seems to be working, so let's use that because I can't figure out how to get this chat going. Kind of underlines the whole volunteer nature of this. This is not my job, and I don't know how to do it. That's okay. Hopefully, we've got plenty of questions and things in the Q&A section. We do not want cost to be a barrier, so all talks this week are free. However, we do have overheads. It costs about £1,000 a year to keep the website, mailing list, and so on going. And we occasionally pay for a small amount of admin time on top of that too. We do please request donations to help cover these costs. The suggested amount is £5 per talk or £20 for the whole festival per household. But please just give whatever you feel is appropriate. This pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-feel model has worked out for us so far, and we've always covered our costs. But we know from past virtual events that only around 1/3 of attendees will actually donate, so do please consider it. Okay, so on to Markus. As I say, many folk will be familiar with Markus's work from the many books he's written, from the Bikepacking Scotland website, from the Dirt Dash events. Markus has ridden around the world on a single speed bike. He has ridden, I'm going to estimate 98% of all of the paths and roads in all of Scotland on a gravel bike. And today he's going to talk about, well, actually, one thing I'm going to know about Markus is I'm sure he's done more hiker bike than almost any other person alive. And I'm also fairly confident that the talk he's going to give today is going to have not very much hiker bike. And Markus will explain why. All right, well, I'll leave it over to you, Markus. If the chat does open, I will I'll ping something on the chat, so hopefully we'll be able to see it. Okay, thanks,
Awesome.
Markus. Over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Let's see if that all works. Cool. I hope everyone can see that. Yeah, warm welcome. It's nice to be part of the Cycle Touring Festival again. And I've literally finished a film tonight. Well, almost finished a film, which I'm going to show you at the very end. But just a quick introduction about me, what I'm doing, in a really short one minute video clip. So I'm just going to press play. Right. I've got no idea where I put that sound in there, but literally tonight is about cargo bike packing. But before, I'm going to tell you more about 4 adventures I've done now on cargo bike. I'm possibly going to just take a really short dive back into my life beforehand, just to put things a little bit in perspective. I moved to Scotland 15 years ago now, almost 16 years ago, and basically fell in love with the country. And I've also been cycling for quite a while now. I've never been a sporty child. Exercise was not really part of my routine when I was a child. But yeah, I fell in love with cycling pretty late in my life. But ever since that happened, I kept on cycling, and um, I really cut my teeth into off-road riding when I spent 2 years in New Zealand from 2007 to 2009. That was just before I moved to Scotland. And also, this is where the inspiration for my guidebook writing comes from, because I lived in Wellington, and there's a couple of brothers called the Kenneth brothers, and they've done some amazing work down there. So this was kind of the inspiration for what I'm doing right now with Bikepacking Scotland. And in terms of bikepacking, I think we're like, especially using the term in the cycle touring festival, I think for me, as with a lot of things, I think my definition of bikepacking is pretty much, I don't think there's a huge difference between cycle touring and bikepacking. Both have many aspects to them. I think bikepacking is often seen as possibly a bit more lightweight and everything is a bit leaner, but I generally think both have the same purpose, getting around. And very much my approach to riding bikes is also, I really see a bicycle as an extension of my own personal freedom. It just gives you a brilliant tool to go further and farther. And throughout the years, I think I think the thing which is quite common in my work is, like, I've always taken a particular bike and just tailored a trip around it. I think there's bikes that come on the market that kind of make people's eyes roll at the beginning, but then I've also kind of used that as inspiration to do something around it. Bikepacking, I've done races, I've developed routes. I think I've ridden fast and I've ridden slow. So this is a picture from the Highland Trail 550 in Scotland. It's possibly one of the only routes I wouldn't take a cargo bike on, because it's going to be quite tricky to get that over a river like this. Um, and I think what possibly a few people know me for is two things. This is the Capital Trail. That's the first bikepacking route I planned in Scotland in 2015. And then afterwards, I set off I've always called that an extended Capital Trail, basically on a trip around the world on a single speed bike. So very extreme. So you've got a single speed bike here, and then I'm going to talk about cargo bikepacking and e-cargo bikepacking. So possibly, but that's the thing I love, and this is the thing I love about bicycles. I think there is no such thing as you can only ride one or the other. I think you can ride all of them and have fun. Just to give you some impressions from riding around the world, this is cycling across Iceland. My trip took me from Edinburgh to Barcelona, from Barcelona to Reykjavik, from Reykjavik over to New York City. And then I rode across the US, ended up in San Francisco, rode across New Zealand, then rode across Australia, 6,500 kilometers. That was the longest stretch I've ever cycled in a single country. And then to Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, and then over with the plane last journey to Tehran, and then back all the way back to Edinburgh. But cargo bikepacking. So I got into cargo bike riding. I think I would say about 3 years ago. There's a wonderful thing here in Edinburgh called the Edinburgh Cargo Bike Library. It's basically pay £10 for a day, and people can hire a cargo bike for a day. And I think for me, there was an ideal thing, because I don't have much space at home, and I've mainly used the cargo bike to transport books around, to go shopping at IKEA, to, as you can see in this picture, put a bike in a box on it and cycle to the post office to ship it to someone else. So I think cargo bikes have always been, I think they've been a utility bike. But I've also quickly discovered that a lot of cargo bikes are often just ridden in towns. And I was quite curious how how they fare going on a longer trip. So in 2023, I saw an article in the Cycling UK magazine, and they had this bike, the Hase Cravat Dust, as a test bike. And it was first, and I think this is quite common. It was first, yeah. I was looking at this, and I was kind of like, who really needs a gravel cargo bike? And then I took a second look at the bike, and I thought, like, this is actually quite an interesting concept because Haase based that bike on the platform of the Pinot. The Haase Pinot is like a tandem, so it's the same platform. The nice thing about this is it's the lightest cargo bike I've ever ridden. It weighs in about 20 kilograms without any of the luggage, so it's super lightweight. And the cool thing is you can take the front off, take it off and make the bike shorter. So if you make that bike shorter, it fits into any train, it fits into onto a rack on the car. So it's quite a handy bike. So and I wasn't really sure having a drop bar on a cargo bike, how that work. Like conclusion from the trip, it's brilliant. It's actually really nice. To give you a little bit of a heads up, which route I took. So I started in Edinburgh, then I cycled from Edinburgh to Newcastle on day one, and then from Newcastle to Sunderland, and then I was joined by Mark Beaumont in Sunderland, and together we cycled to Whitby. I worked on a route last year called Route YC, which is a route along the Yorkshire coast. So we followed that route all the way down to Hull, and then Mark left me, and I took the ferry from Hull over to Rotterdam, and then cycled across the Netherlands and Germany back to where my mum lives in Erfurt. And the nice thing about the journey is like I'm at heart a bikepacker. I'm an ultra cyclist, so this was a pretty tough shift all the way because I only had a few days to get home. So I cycled around 170 kilometers on the first day to get to Newcastle, and in no means easy conditions. I guess one limiting factor on taking a cargo bike on longer journeys is that um, if you've got side winds, it can be quite tricky, and it's also possibly not the easiest bike to cycle uphill, but it's doable. You can see that from the sign. Throughout the Scottish borders, I had 17% inclines, and coming to Yorkshire, that was actually much steeper. And it takes a wee while to get used to that, but once it going, and that was the setup on the bike. So the Hase Cravat is a front loader. Um, the thing I love about taking a bike like this, I think I'm very much conditioned to bike packing where you have to take the smallest amount of kit. On this journey, I could take a little bit more, and I also had a few Christmas orders for books, and from experience, people order last minute, so I just put a few books on the bike as well, and fulfilled my orders by stopping at the post offices along the way. So yeah, interesting journey. Just to give you some impressions from the trip. Scenically, super nice. This was Mark joining me on Route YC along the Yorkshire coast. And the interesting thing, one thing we figured out while going uphill on the cargo bike is much slower realistically than on another bike. So this one didn't have a motor attached to it as well. Um, the good thing is once that bike rolls, it really rolls. Mark was on a super lightweight road bike, and I managed to overtake him every now and then when there was a flat, straight road. Because yeah, once it got going, it really got going. To give you some expression, and I think for me, the trip was also to kind of the nice thing about this particular bike was it was specifically aimed at people who want to ride bits off road as well. So I took this bike on the cinder track from Whitby to Scarborough, and then on a few other off road routes as well. And while having a 20-inch wheel on the front and a 26-inch wheel on the back, it is not a mountain bike, definitely not. But it was totally fine to ride some bumpy off-road sections as well. You possibly sense from the picture. It's definitely not the smoothest of tracks. And then onto the ferry, ferry from Hull to Rotterdam. I guess another challenge traveling. So a definite challenge traveling by cargo bike is the transport. So as I already mentioned, this bike is pretty convenient, because by taking the platform off on the front and making it shorter, it actually doesn't fit into trains. I think a standard cargo bike, there's no such thing as getting it on the train in the UK. But on the ferry, there's no issues whatsoever. It's like a normal bike, cycle on, cycle off. So I guess that's something to bear in mind when planning adventures. Trains are pretty much out of reach in the UK. There's a few trains in Scotland that might be able to take them, but I wouldn't bet on it. And just take you a little bit on a journey on that trip. This was cycling through a tunnel in the Netherlands. The Netherlands overall is perfect for cycling on such a big bike, and there's quite a few cargo bikes on the roads there as well. And also the cycling infrastructure in the Netherlands was a joy, but the bike was also pretty capable. As it happens, I think in pretty much every trip I do, sometimes taking the wrong turn happens. So in the Netherlands, where I wasn't expecting any hills and not so much single track, I actually got routed on the proper mountain bike trail by Komoot. And again, like, the bike handled it well. It was actually quite fun doing something a little bit different in the evening, and then arriving at the accommodation. And also throughout Germany, I often that's the kind of nice thing on those journeys, like having such a flexible platform kind of didn't prevent me from going on single trails or any off-road tracks. So cargo bike packing doesn't have to be on the road all the time. And that was me arriving at the Hase factory. So Hase is based in Waltrop in Germany. They originally come from the adaptive cycle background. So they've got a huge expertise in doing tricycles and other special needs cycles. And it was just quite interesting seeing the company, and I'm basically cycling the bike from Edinburgh to the factory, and then a little bit further on to my mum's place for Christmas. And then the second trip, so I would say the trip very much got me hooked on doing more with cargo bikes, and I also do think, and this is now coming to the next level, so e-cargo bikes. So you'll possibly find a lot of cargo bikes will have a motor due to the fact that they weigh often much more than a normal bicycle. And I discovered this one. This is a Turn Orox. I would say it's a big bike. It's definitely a big bike. Different platform than the Hases. So the biggest difference between the two bikes is the Hase is a front loader, and this one is has a larger back end. So the difference between the two bikes, while the Turn has pretty much the same carrying capacity or even more, it does ride basically like a mountain bike. And I teamed up with Jenny Graham on this trip. So our aim was to take two of those Turn Orox cargo bikes and really put them to the test, to really kind of show that taking a cargo bike doesn't have to be, it's pretty much the same as taking a mountain bike. So we and the nice thing for us as well, and I think this is where those bikes come in quite handy. I often find that traveling on a normal bikepacking setup or on a cycle touring setup, it does come with concessions because there's only so much stuff you can take. On those bikes, they've got two batteries, they've got a motor. There is a lot of space in those panniers to pack things. So it was kind of like our plan for this trip was to have a Jenny called it a bougie bikepacking trip, basically taking the tent, taking a proper small foldable chair, taking a proper stove and stuff like this. So kind of have like a proper camping trip on bikes. Now, as I mentioned already beforehand, often the plan and what happens in reality are two different things. On this trip, we had about 50 millimeters of rain on the second day. So the idea of camping, while we had everything in the bags, we kind of resorted into staying somewhere inside because it was literally just bucketing down the whole day. But we it is some interesting challenges on this trip. And this is I think from a professional point of view, I'm a route planner as well. It's quite interesting taking such a long and heavy bike on a trip like this because it really shows you where the infrastructure is up to scratch and where isn't. Um, there were times on this trip where we had to really push the bike with two people up those tiny bridges. So it was a challenge at times, but it was all doable. With two people, it was fine. I think this is possibly worthwhile considering if you do a longer trip on a cargo bike. I think it's good to make yourself familiar with what the terrain's like and how the paths are like. Google Street View goes a long way sometimes. Komoot has a feature as well where you can see what the trail looks like at times. So it's possibly worthwhile. The alternative to that one is there's gonna be a few surprises along the way. This was our route, and the route we took was modeled on a route I've got in the Bikepacking Scotland book. We went from Inverness on the old military road first, and then went into the Cairngorms National Park, to the Cairngorms National Park, parts of the Speyside Way, and we stayed at Tumlin Tool, the highest village in the Highlands, and then we went from Tumlin Towel. We had originally a different route, but then kind of went back on the Speyside Way, past Glenlivet mountain bike trails, and then into this is risky country all the way up to Elgin, and then Elgin would have been our original plan was to camp somewhere nice on the coast. But as I said beforehand, we got totally drowned out. We got basically soaked all day, so we stayed in Elgin instead. But then went along the Moray coastal path. There's some amazing beaches up there. And the nice thing about the Orcs is it's basically an e-cargo fat bike. It's got 27.5 by 4-inch wheels. They're big and they're perfect to cycle on the beaches. So just to give you some ideas, like the terrain we covered. So this is the Glenlivet mountain bike trails. This is proper single trail. And again, like with a long tail bike, it's basically like riding a mountain bike. It's not too different. The only thing which was out of bounds was taking any jumps, but I'm not that much of a mountain bike that I jump anyway, but anything else was doable on the bikes. And the other thing where on this trip where the bikes really excelled, especially with the motor, was riding along the beaches. Like it was a totally different riding experience with having a bit of assistance. As much as that we kind of like we loved it so much that we actually went kind of the wrong direction onto a sand pit, and then we had to cycle another 5 kilometers back on the sand to go back on our original route. And also along old railway lines. So you can kind of guess from the terrain it's varied. It's pretty much everything I would normally do on a gravel/mountain bike as well. And as I mentioned beforehand, this was kind of the whole purpose of the whole trip, having a bougie camp. So what you won't see in this picture that we actually sat in those chairs for 10 minutes, took pictures and filmed it, and then it started raining again. But we kind of refused to give in. So we're literally sitting in our deck chairs on the beach, having a cup of coffee. So there was the second trip, and then my girlfriend is from Quebec in Canada. And having done this trip with the Oroks, I was quite intrigued how the same bike would fare on a longer trip. So we covered about 170 kilometers on those 3 days in Moray and Speyside. So I was really interested in what it is like to ride a bike like this for a longer distance, and especially also kind of to test out how far I could literally get with one or two batteries. And the inspiration for that was a trip I went over in June to do some work for a German company called Tutorang in Gaspésie, where my girlfriend's from. And it always already looks absolutely amazing in summer, but the same place in autumn is just a totally different level. So I took this as an inspiration to head over to Quebec. I had to rent the bike in Canada, so it's impossible to fly that bike anywhere. And taking a boat to from 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 Scotland to Canada takes a fair while as well. So I managed to source a bike in Canada and picked it up. Now the challenge with that one is I'm just gonna quickly give you an idea of Canada is a huge country. This is the whole of Canada, and Quebec is this still huge. And I cycled in the eastern tip. You can see at the bottom, and I had originally requested the bike as we had it in Scotland, so with two batteries and two chargers to be able to charge the batteries at night and to cover big distances. But as I mentioned before, and sometimes planning and the trip in real life is something different. So the bike came, but it only had one battery and it also didn't have a key to take the battery off. So I basically then had to find a way to charge the bike somewhere inside. Now, Canada and the US are pretty good countries for that because everything's built around cars. So using a cargo bike there, even without being able to take the battery off, is doable. It was a bit of a challenge at times, but this was my route. I had planned the route around two batteries. So with two batteries, the bike's supposed to do at least 200 kilometers. Now that's in ideal conditions. If there's a little bit of wind and if there's a few hills, then it's going to be really tricky to cover those distances as they're advertised. But never mind. I didn't want to change my trips, so I still had one day, which was 170 kilometers, and with one battery, that's pretty much impossible. So I used the eco mode on the bike. I just very occasionally shifted into tour mode for people who are not too familiar with e-bikes. So the bike I had comes with 5 modes. First one is switching it off. That's hard work, really hard work. Then the eco mode, that's a decent amount of assistance, but on hills, there's still you have to pedal quite hard on those on that mode. On the flat, it's okay, but as soon as you come into hilly country, it's possibly not the best mode. Then the next mode is tour mode. This might be totally different with other bikes, but that's just for what I used. Tour is more assistance than eco mode, and that's normally fine for long distance riding. And then there's an EMTB mode, which is basically giving more assistance on the hills and taking out the assistance where you don't really need it. And then there's the turbo, and turbo is basically, I think, if yeah, full assistance pretty much most of the time. So due to the fact that I only had one battery, I could only really use the eco mode. And on this trip, I basically cycled the bike without a battery. At times, I'm by heart a single speeder still. So I thought I've ridden a single speed bike around the world, so I might as well kind of make this happen and cycle at times 50 kilometers without any assistance. It's proper training, and then do the rest with motor assistance. It took me 7 days to cycle from Quebec City, that's where I started, to Gaspé, which is like the easternmost tip. And just to give you some ideas, it was a beautiful journey. And the nice thing, so one big advantage of having a bike with so much luggage capacity, I didn't want to go over to Canada just for one project. So I had another project afterwards with two other bikes, but I basically had to take bike packing bags for two bikes with me. I could fit all of those into the bag. So like at times it takes a while to unload the bike, but yeah, it's very convenient having a lot of space. And one thing I had to readjust from traditional bikepacking trips, I think I'm the sort of person who's used to very low carrying capacity with saddlebags. So on a bike like this, you can actually take proper food. You don't really have to think about what you're going to put in those panniers. Beautiful landscape, as I mentioned. Canada is as the US, built around cars. I quite like this picture of stopping at a petrol station and someone's parked their motorbike, and yeah, the turn is still much smaller, but it's quite a big bike. And it's also as I think as with any cycle touring trip, so the model I've used was a pre-production sample. So that means that there might be some small things that can go wrong at times. I had one occasion where the one of my cranks, the bolt came a little bit loose, and then I had to find this really nice gentleman somewhere in the middle of nowhere, just literally rolled over, knocked on his door, and he had a massive garage. So we managed jointly to find a proper Allen key and tighten the bolt again. And to give you an idea, so this is kind of what it looks like if you're not able to get the battery off the bike. So I had to find accommodation where I could wheel a bicycle into the room and charge the bike that way. And this was also hiding from about 60 millimeters of rain in one afternoon. And to some amazing landscapes, like the east coast of Quebec is a wonderful part of the world to cycle. And it's also in October. So I cycled in the first 2 weeks of October. There's hardly any traffic there any longer. The tourism season has long finished by then. But places were still open, which was quite nice. So it was not totally empty. And and this is the final stretch from Murdochville into Gaspé and then to the coast to kind of enjoy my last day and kind of took it a bit easy. So that was the longest trip I had done so far, or not the longest trip, but kind of the most extreme. But having done some riding on the York, so having done 2 trips, I also thought, and this is where an e-cargo bike really comes into play, is I always wanted to do a longer trip in winter. And the thing that's kind of kept me away from that most of the time is that it's just really difficult to take a big, heavy, or not necessarily heavy, but quite bulky sleeping bag, all the winter camping equipment, and fit that on a normal bike. So having access to the Orcs in Norway, it was kind of like the last spark I needed to kind of finally do a winter journey. And this is the bike I used in Norway, so similar to what I've used in Canada. Slightly different setup, but where the 2 bikes were very different is this one had studded tires. It's 27.5 by 4-inch studded tires are very, very expensive. So it's only recommended if you really need them. And I also had pogies on the handlebars. So pogies are basically big cloths where you can put your cloths in. It's a really convenient way to filter out the wind chill a little bit. To give you an idea on the temperatures I was riding in Norway, I started at -1 on day 1 and it went down to -16, -17. As in the coldest, I was out for 8 days. In those 8 days, there wasn't a single time. No, that's not true. At the last night, temperatures went slightly above 0 and then went down again below 0. But those are the conditions. And I mentioned it beforehand, it's an ideal bike for any winter riding. You will possibly ask why so much kit. Is it really necessary? The thing about winter cycling for me is you really need to be prepared for a lot of scenarios that can happen. I'm always a big fan being prepared for something. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. So I took full camping gear down to -30 with me. I ended up not camping on the trip, but I took it with me simple as a backup. If something breaks on the bike, if something breaks on my body, if something unexpected happens, I would have had the opportunity to pitch my tent and hopefully survive for at least a few days. I was also filming the whole trip for a film. So in those extreme camp temperatures, well, extreme for, I think for me being based in Scotland, I think for someone who lives in Canada or Norway, it's possibly not too extreme. But I took camera gear with me, and I also took a backup for each camera, because flying a drone in -10 degrees means that the propellers ice up. So I just wanted to make sure if something doesn't work in the temperatures, that I would have a backup to do what I wanted to do. And also clothing wise, I think on a trip like this, it's not so much the weight actually, it's more the bulk you need on the bike to take enough winter equipment. I had backup gloves, I had backup pants, insulating jackets and all this sort of stuff. So just to be sure that even if I would have used one set, I would have another set of clothing just to be on the safe side. Um, and the trip started in Eidsvoll. This was also a bit of a experiment in how easy it is. So in Norway with this bike, it was actually okay to get the bike on the trains. I only had one conductor who didn't like the size of the bike and was basically telling me that the tires could only be 5 centimeters wide. I don't know if there's such a rule or not. It doesn't really matter. I kind of convinced him that it's the last train and I'm not really, no one else was on the train. So it was possible to take the bike on the train, and I had a small train journey in between on a much smaller train. And the driver came out, gave me a hand lifting the bike into the train over 4 steps. So it was doable. Starting in Eidsvoll, there's my route. Eidsvoll is north of Oslo. This is where the snow starts pretty much, on Lake Mjosa. And then I went from there to Gjøvik for the first night, stayed in a really nice hostel, and then further up north to Ringebu, and then to the Gudbrandsdalen, to Dovre. Then the fourth day to Dovre National Park, to a small campsite along the road on the E6. And then from there to Alfdal. I stayed in some huts there, and then the bit you see where there's no track, that's me taking the train because I had to cycle on the E3, which was way too busy, and there was fresh snow and there were snow plows all over the place. So there was the time where I felt really uncomfortable being on the road. So I just opted for the train instead. And then cycled the last bit from Koppang to Budur, and then from Budur back to Eidsvoll. To prepare for the trip, and this is, I think, one thing again, which is possibly quite universal for cargo bikepacking. I would say every cargo bike is a big and heavy bike, so it does make perfect sense not to set off on a long bikepacking trip without having ever ridden and handled the bike. So and for this particular trip, I just wanted to be 100% sure I can ride this bike in snow, I can ride the bike in ice. So instead of just riding around without any purpose, I rediscovered, my girlfriend lives in Norway. We discovered there was a pile of logs on the field, and the farmer didn't really want to use them. So we asked the farmer if we can get the logs and pull them into our garden and take them apart there for firewood. So I basically used the oaks to pull logs over a field, did a great job. It's also a good exercise to kind of really handle the bike with quite a bit of pull on the back and a bit of weight. And talking about weight, so simulating having a lot of gear on the bike, I took some of the wood, which was a perfect size, and loaded it on the bike. Again, it does take a bit of a while to get used to it because it balances totally different than if the bike's not loaded. But basically did all of that, also cycled through deep snow, kind of all the conditions I could imagine before actually setting off on the trip. So the trip itself was only 8 days, but the preparation for the trip was much, much longer. And just to give you some impressions from the trip, and then I'll show you the film from it, which is, yeah, it's kind of a world premiere because I've just finished the second cut tonight. This was setting off, riding in fog first, and then for 10 minutes, getting a little bit higher, riding without the fog, and then back into the valley. And the thing is, riding in winter in Norway, it's if you're a little bit higher up, it's actually a little bit warmer often because the cold air sinks into the valley. There was yeah, getting shock frosted on the first day because I left at -1, and then when I ended up at this petrol station to warm up with a coffee, it was like -7. So that makes a difference already. You can possibly get an idea from that. And then on the second day, again riding in freezing fog along Lake Mjosa, beautiful landscape. And this is the thing. This was the reason why I wanted to do a winter cycling trip, because it's a totally different experience. With the right gear, I do think it's enjoyable. It does take a lot of gear though, giving you some impressions. And it's also with this trip, a bit like in Scotland. I think the only downside to winter trips is you don't really have much daylight at all. So the bike came with lights fitted to it, and they were pretty awesome. I normally left at 8 in the morning, rode the first hour in the darkness, then if the sun shows up, otherwise it just gets light, until 3:30 in the afternoon, then sunset, and then there's another hour roughly, with some sort of light, and then it's back into the dark. And I kind of, depending on where I finished, I stopped at, yeah, often between 7 and 8 in the evening, and passing the world's biggest cheese craters. So that was one tool that got invented in Norway. The Norwegians are very proud of cheese craters, so I managed to find the biggest one of that. And you can possibly sense from the way I'm dressed in this picture, on the third day, things got a little bit more serious with proper snow. I had goggles, just yeah, to kind of keep the snow out of my eyes. My face properly covered with a balaclava. But riding to some magic landscapes, and it's quite interesting in a way. This bike almost looks like motorbike touring in a sense. And then I stayed in a cabin, and I did race in Norway in summer, and there's a route which in summer is possibly one of the most scenic cycling routes in the world, is Grimsdalen. I was just curious whether or not I could potentially ride this in winter. Short and simple answer is no, because the one thing I recognized, so the bike was riding pretty much brilliantly in all conditions, but this route is not cleared in winter at all. It was basically a massive plank ice sheet with fresh snow over it, and that was the conditions where I struggled on the bike. Like, it was really hard to get traction even with studs. And then to get traction on such fat tires, the easiest way is to lower the pressure. But then what happens lowering the pressure with having quite a bit of weight? The bike itself weighs about 40 kilos already. It's a very interesting riding. So I thought, like, doing 50 or more kilometers in those conditions on a road which is not accessible is not a good idea. So we reverted back to the roads and cycle on those instead. And what you possibly see a little bit from the reflections, that all of those roads are basically completely iced over. At times the ice is very grippy, so if it's if there's car traffic, then it's pretty grippy. At other times, I was really happy to have studded tires on the bike. And Norway in winter was it's two extremes, I guess. Some wonderful colors when the sun comes out, and the rest is monochrome. Like, there's not much color once it's cloudy over. And to give you an idea, this was the coldest night I had on the trip. Staying in a small campsite just off the A6. It was -12 in the morning when I got on the bike, and basically the whole bike was covered by ice, and it was like, very, very cold. Cold but utterly beautiful. And give you an idea, this is for me quite extreme. If the eyebrows are starting to freeze, then there's there was the only day where I struggled a little bit with even with gloves, but I had toe warmers. They were like a bit bigger than the hand warmers, and basically put them into my lobster gloves to have like a little bit of a heat source. I didn't have any USB heated gloves or anything like this. Those toe warmers were did a good job on that day, and also a trip where it was no shortage of snow halfway through the trip, about 30 or 40 centimeters of fresh snow overnight on this occasion. But as I mentioned beforehand, it was some wonderful nature, and yeah, I think when it comes to cargo bikepacking, I think especially in winter, where distance possibly doesn't matter that much at all. I think it's like cycling through those landscapes. Don't have to go far. I mean, I did anything between 53 and 120 kilometers, which is possibly quite long already, but it doesn't have to be. Like, it's also totally fine to go shorter distances. And the nice thing in Norway is it's a country that's used to winter, so most of the facilities are still open. So it's not a big problem to find something to eat and something to stay, which is pretty convenient. Just to give you some more ideas, and that was me finishing in Eidsvoll. So on the last night, I mentioned I had full camping equipment with me, and the original plan was to camp that night. But it was starting to rain that night, and I also had to consider that getting the bike on the train the next morning in peak traffic might not be possible. So that was the reason why I liked it and cycled the remainder of the trip to make the last train at 11:30 at night, and then wheeling the bike on the train and arriving home at, I don't know, 1:30 in the morning after a long train journey. So I'm going to finish my presentation with a film. So this is to give you an idea about the Norway trip. It's not finished yet, what you see. This is still work in progress. But yeah, I hope you can enjoy and appreciate 8 minutes of cycling in the cold in Norway. And then I'm happy to have a look at the chat and answer questions afterwards.
Winter's always been a special season for me. I'm a big advocate of getting more people to cycle in winter because it's such a scenic season. And while it's challenging, it comes with so many rewards, and planning something around an e-cargo bike which has a lot of carrying capacity was kind of the final spark I needed to set off on a winter trip and really do a longer adventure in snow and ice. It was magic. I'm here in Eidsvoll. This is the start of my winter cycling adventure through Norway. Freezing fog everywhere, but it's kind of magic. Day 3, and you might guess from my outfit, today is gonna possibly be a bit more serious than the last 2 days. Day 4. I think I'm gonna quit here. Yeah, I don't want to go too far up to be stuck, so I'm gonna take a few images here, I think, and then I'm gonna head down the valley and take the safer route. -10. You can sense it's cold by the way I'm dressed, and yeah, looking forward to day 5. Tonight was pretty cold. The bike's like solidly covered in ice, and yeah, it's a bit foggy. I was hoping I'm gonna see the sun. It is really cold. I'm descending into the valley to Folldal, and it's actually getting colder and colder. So part of me wishes to stay on the top and not go down to the valley, but I eventually have to do that. Ice all over the place. The whole road is basically one big ice sheet. That's a lot of snow. Started snowing properly again. This is the last shift for today. 15 kilometers to go. Up the hill, big hill. Here in Budo, and now I'm back on the bike and I'm heading towards Hamar, and we'll find a nice place to camp for tonight. Bit of an unexpected turn of events here. I was meant to camp, but it was really tricky to find a site to pitch the tent here along Lake Nyasa, so I've carried on. I almost had a suitable spot and then it started raining, and now the rain has turned into snow again, but I've decided I'm gonna be able to make the last train to Oslo and onto Vestby, so that's when the ultra cyclist in me comes through. Just gonna cycle the last 12 kilometers to the train station and then enjoy my potato salad and some food at the train station instead.
Right. So that's me. Thanks for listening. Before we go to questions, possibly a quick plug from my side. If anyone's interested in joining other people for bikepacking, Steve mentioned it. I run a series called the Dirt Dashes. So they are all, yeah. The first one's possibly not suitable for cargo bikes, but the other two are. And I've also got a wee house if someone wants cycling friendly accommodation. And I've also, as mentioned, I've written a few books. If anyone's interested in either the books or the Dirt Dashes, you can get 10% off the books or £10 off the events. Those are the addresses. Just use CTF. And yeah, thanks for listening. And yeah, over to questions, I presume.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marcus. I didn't tell by reading the chat, everyone's been thoroughly enjoying that. And oh gosh, that video of Norway was something else. Was absolutely wonderful. Just to mention, everyone, I've just put links to Marcus's books and events in the chat. So if you haven't to copy and paste and type everything in, I can attest that the books I've used have been brilliant and a great read, even if you're not going to do the routes. Cool. Let's have a quick look. There's quite a few questions. Quite a lot of people have asked the same question, so I'm going to ask that question first, which was one of the first questions that popped into my head as well, which is how did you find the effect of temperature on the battery range on the bike?
So this is the bit I've actually taken out of the video to make it a bit more positive. So I would tell how it, like, in those really cold temperatures, the batteries perform a little bit worse than the normal conditions. I would possibly say 10% less capacity. So not much. There wasn't a huge thing. And I can certainly say that my own battery levels in the cold trained much faster than the bike did. I think one thing to consider, though, and I think this is the reason. So I already mentioned I didn't mention it, but in Norway I took 2 battery chargers with me, simply because if you get the batteries off the bike from those pretty cold temperatures, they need a good 1.5 hours to warm up to room temperature, so they won't charge at anything below 0. So once you take the batteries off, it'll take like an hour, 1.5 hours to warm up. And then those were pretty big Bosch batteries. They take 5 to 6 hours easily to charge up again. And as I didn't want to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and unplug one battery and put the other one in, I took for more convenience 2 chargers. But I was very pleasantly surprised how well they performed. So I think, yeah, they did a great job. There wasn't a huge difference between and it's the same in Quebec. I rode between 20, like it was, the warmest was about 20 degrees Celsius and the coldest was slightly above 0, slightly below 0 in autumn there. And there wasn't really from that kind of thing. I think, although, I mean, this is one thing too, which I think generally applies to all bikes, all e-bikes, I would presume. Just be very careful with what the companies say the battery will do and what the reality looks like. As I said, like those things are measured in ideal conditions, and if you're out on the road, especially riding off road, there's never ideal conditions. So I think, but it's something to find out. This is why I did so much testing before the Norway trip, just to have that experience myself and not follow the guidance of any manufacturer. And yeah, it was fine. They covered all the distances I need to cover with the capacity I had.
Yeah, I'll say from my own experience, the load on a cargo bike makes a huge difference to the range as well. Like, if I throw my kids on the back, then it will probably cut the range by 30%. So and certainly, in winter charging's, you've got to be a lot more careful with charging, making sure you take the batteries indoors and things as well. Well, so that was the most asked question. Probably the most important question that was asked was from Brenda, and she's asking, did you get to eat brunost when you were in Norway?
Brunost, yes, I did actually. It's perfect. This is one of those cheeses you can eat in every temperature as well. Actually, so to give a bit of a background, I like the Brunos cheese kind of inspired the trip because we had been up to the mountains beforehand and ended up driving past the Brunos factory. So I kind of thought like, oh, this is quite cool. I might go back there on the bike. Yeah, I had it. It's great cheese. But it's not. Is it cheese? I don't know. Not sure if it's cheese. It's like for people who don't know Brunost, it's brown cheese. It's very common in Norway. Best eaten on a waffle. Tasty.
It's very sweet, isn't it?
Yes, it's very sweet. Yeah, yeah.
From experience of having been to Norway like quite a few times, I think it was maybe like the third or fourth time I went to Norway, I actually started to enjoy it. It felt like a bit of an acquired taste. Brenda again is asking, what languages are your books available in?
They're all in English at the moment. Yeah. There might maybe at some stage. I speak German, as some people know, but they're all in English.
Okay, cool. Anonymous attendee is asking if you could only have either a cargo bike or a single speed bike for the rest of your life, which would you keep?
Well, this is a really tricky question. Damn it. You got me on this one. I think about let's be realistic. I think I would possibly still choose a single speed bike because they're both okay. The one thing they have in common, they both very practical bikes, but for very different reasons. I think the single speed bike is very practical because it doesn't need any maintenance most of the time. And I'm not good with bike maintenance. The cargo bike, on the other hand, is just perfect to do pretty much everything with it. So, yeah, tough one. Can I go for 50-50? Is that okay? Because I can put the single speed bike on the cargo bike if need be.
Yeah, good point. You can get that actually sparked a question in me. Did you find over the sort of distances, like I've certainly noticed riding a cargo bike, like pad wear on the discs and chain wear is a lot higher than you would expect with a standard bike. Was that something that you had to take into consideration for your trips, or did you manage to sort of do without having to do much maintenance?
Well, thankfully not, but possibly the person I handed the bike back to has to replace the chain now. It is hard wearing. Like this is the thing, and I guess my general bit of advice, it really depends on where you live. So for Norway and for the remote parts of Quebec, I would potentially say a chain would still be the way for me to go. So like most cargo bikes come either with chains or with gates with carbon belts. I guess a chain is still the convenience. That is something that can be fixed in pretty much every bike shop, even if it breaks. So that's the thing that for me still speaks for a chain. But I think if you use those bikes in close proximity to a bike shop that can fix, or you can fix it yourself, then I would possibly say the roll-off and carbon drive option is the more reliable one. But yeah, I mean, where on e-bike, I think this is something I discovered. So with cargo bikes or any heavy bikes, I think it does really make a huge difference how you ride the bikes. So on the Bosch powered, I don't know about other bikes, but on the Bosch powered bikes, you basically have a display setting where you can see how much energy you put in and how much the motor has to put in. And I always try to keep that in a good balance because that basically preserves the battery life. And it's also better for wear and tear, I would argue. Because this is the thing, like in the turbo mode, you can grind up hills in the smallest cog if you really want to. But that's definitely not good for any of the parts which are on the bike. So like finding a good balance is definitely worthwhile. But things wear out quicker. It's just the sheer size and the sheer weight you put on those components. It's a totally different level. Yeah.
Paul is asking, how are you getting the bike to the start of your rides? I think you sort of answered that in the talk a little bit, but there was also some talk in the chat
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I've got an all works in Edinburgh, so I kind of have to ride everywhere. That's basically it. I think I'll give it a go on the trains in Scotland next week. I'm heading to the Fort William Mountain Festival, and yeah, I kind of want to take the train to Stirling and then cycle the rest. So there's not really much alternative. Like for most of the cargo bikes, I think if you want to get them from A to B, trains, sadly, I don't know what the situation is like in Europe. On German trains, you can, like the Hase I had, you could get that on trains. That wasn't an issue at all. And that was the big thing. Like that's what really is a huge positive on that bike. It's lightweight and you can squeeze it. So it is like but it's also, I think this is one thing. I mean, there was the Oroks and some of the longer bikes. I mean, they are on the extreme end of cargo bikes. There are cargo bikes out there, like a lot of the long tails. They're actually not much longer than a normal bike, so you would potentially get them on trains as well. It's worth trying. And yeah, but reality is like anything like flying your bike is out of bounds because it's really, I think there are a few airlines that possibly might allow you to take an e-bike on the plane. But if you walk up with a bike that weighs 40 kilograms, that's it. It's cargo.
I can say from experience, I know I actually just looked this up. The weight of the Oroks is 33.2 kilograms.
Yeah.
I know the bike rack that goes on the tow ball of my car will take up to 32, I think. I've carried a Turn GSD on it, and all I had to do is kind of take off the removable bits, and that got it to 32. So it is possible to get cargo bikes onto car racks. It takes a bit of work and you need longer straps and things, but it is doable. So that's another option. If folk are kind of wondering about how to get a cargo bike around, but yeah, you are generally kind of geographically constrained a bit with a cargo bike for sure. Great. There was one last question, which is from Martin, who is saying, all of your films are so beautifully shot. Would you consider a YouTube video showing how you approach and shoot them?
Yeah, happy to do that at some stage. That's that's a good suggestion. There's someone was also asking if the video with Jenny is available online. Yeah, it is. Have a look for Chasing Rainbows. That's what it's called. It's quite fun, as you can imagine with Jenny Graham. It's not boring. Yeah, happy to do that. It's like, it's kind of, I mean, this is the big advantage on those bikes as well. With filming, it's just easier to take like a proper SLR camera and a proper, like, possibly the camera is not so much the difference. I think it's just I really struggle on a normal bike setup to take any tripod, like any bigger tripod with me, which doesn't weigh a lot, but it's bulky. So anything which is bulky is ideal. Yeah.
Cool. And what do you think gives you more assists on a bike ride? Is it being on an e-bike or riding with Jenny Graham?
Good question. I think both. Riding an e-bike with Jenny Graham is great fun, I can tell you that. It's good, yeah. But Jenny is good fun, and it's kind of like, and it's also, as I mentioned, like Mark. I was doing a trip with Mark as well. So me, Mark, and Jenny have done quite a few things together. So maybe it'd be cool to put the three of us on cargo bikes and see who can take the most.
That would be pretty cool. All right, well that's great. That's the end of all the questions. Markus, thank you so much for yet another wonderful talk. As you can see in the chat, everyone's been thoroughly enjoying it. I know I certainly did. So I guess it's just to say, to remind everyone that there are still a whole plethora of talks going on until Sunday night. Tomorrow night there is 100 Climbs. Is it Simon Warren? Is that the guy's name? Which looks very interesting. just look on the website. There's so much interesting stuff at the Cycle Touring Festival. Remember, you can donate to the Cycle Touring Festival. The link is on the website, or it was in the chat somewhere as well. Please do help us keep the wheels on, and this talk will be available to watch online at some point as well when Laura gets around to it. Again, thanks everyone for watching, and thanks Markus, and see you all soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks for being part of it.